Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Lauren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome in, and thank you for joining me for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Of course, I am your host, Lauren Sherman, and today I'm very excited. We have a conversation with our special guest, Jacob Schroeder. I'm excited about this one for a number of reasons, one of which is that Jacob and I seem to have a shared passion for thinking about retirement and finances through a lens of happiness and fulfillment. And we'd like to take the same topic others might be talking about, but look at it from a different angle and ask new questions. Jacob seems to have a curious, inquisitive nature, and I think that makes for great conversations. To give you a little background, Jacob is a contributing writer to Kiplinger magazine. He is also the creator of the personal finance newsletter, The Root of All, exploring how money shapes our lives. His goal is to help people make more informed financial decisions and live happier lives. In his role, he creates a variety of educational materials to teach clients about investing and personal finance. Be sure to check out the show notes where I have included links for where to find Jacob and his work. Between his Substack, blog, and everything social media related, Jacob stays busy providing lots of valuable content, all free of charge to the reader. So without further ado, Jacob Schroeder, welcome in, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, and certainly thank you for reading my work and sharing it. This is a great opportunity. I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really good to talk with you today. I'm excited about the conversation. And of course, we're here to talk about one of your recent articles titled 5 Reasons You'll Blow Up Your Retirement Plan. And with a title like that, I'm sure listeners want to jump in and hear about those 5 reasons. But before we do that, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure, no problem. I'm a financial writer by trade, but I also work in the financial industry doing content marketing, as well as working as a contributor writer, as you had mentioned. I live in sunny Metro Detroit with my family. We're just trying to clear ourselves out of a snowstorm at the moment. But
the sunny might be being generous right now.
That's right. It's just overcast and a lot of ice everywhere right now.
Well, there's always springtime is always around the corner. I feel like that's always the mantra living in Iowa for myself. Probably a similar philosophy for you.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to ask you, this is maybe a big picture question, but how did you become a writer in the first place? Or maybe more specifically, writing about finances and making happier choices?
Well, it's been kind of a wayward journey. I started as a copywriter in marketing and advertising. But then my wife and we lived in Chicago, and once we graduated from college, and then after living there for about 10 years, we decided, maybe we should try living at home again and experiencing it as adults. And once we moved back here, I actually did not have a job lined up. So I just moved here to Detroit blindly. And as coincidence would have it, the one job offer that I did get was for a financial advisory founded by Rick Ferry. Some of your listeners might know the name, especially if they're really into Vanguard and John Bogle. But anyways, it was there that I just started to be able to write long form, start writing about money. And I started to realize that, there's a lot of great writers in the financial industry. Not only are what they're writing about really interesting, but they are just skilled writers. So that kind of inspired me to really dig into this. The more I started writing about money, the more I started learning about retirement. And that's kind of when things clicked, because I think we're in a real unique time when it comes to retirement. I mean, it is still kind of a relatively new thing in history. Just to think that in the 20th century, the life expectancy rose from about, I think, 49 to 79. So this is all kind of relatively new that we get to see generations come through and live what we conceptually realize as retirement now.
Right.
And so I think from learning about that and reading real stories of how people in retirement, there's lessons there of how to live today, if you're younger or not, because you get to see, like, okay, so if you have all the money to do whatever you want, I mean, what is it that actually makes you happy? And you can take
Right.
it apply to your life now, even though you're still working. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of good information. Just your point too about retirement being somewhat of a new concept. I remember reading about Social Security and how that was essentially for people that were outliving their life expectancy when it first became a thing. It wasn't there to be relied upon for 20 or 30 years in retirement. It was kind of a let's get people past these 2, 3, 5 years that they're living, quote unquote, longer than they were expected to.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's a good way to kind of think about it is that retirement is kind of still this big experiment. We don't know exactly what it should be, how to make it as fulfilling as we'd want it to be. And that's why the definition is kind of fluid. It keeps on changing. It used to be, well, I'm going to get my gold watch and then I'm just going to live off a pension and, maybe live off a beach. But now you're looking at individuals who think, well, wait a minute, I'm going to start a whole new career. I'm going to start a whole new life.
Well, that's probably a good segue. So, moving into your recent article, once again, 5 reasons you'll blow up your retirement plan.
Mhm.
What's the origin story of this topic? I guess what gave you the idea to write about this one specifically?
Well, I don't have one pivotal story or event. I think it was just a result of reading studies and surveys and real life stories and kind of seeing that, even with a good retirement plan, things keep on changing. I mean, I think retirement, like life, is a journey. It's not a destination. You're never going to just achieve something and it's going to just be exactly how you think it's going to be. But I will say that is heavily influenced by the pandemic, where we all got to experience our plans upended by something with no control.
Right. So, your first reason for potentially wanting to blow up your retirement plan is your retirement reality doesn't meet your retirement expectations. So, in this article, you do a great job of describing the issue, but then you also include some tips of how to prepare for each one. So, let's start off with the issue, if you don't mind. Could you talk a little bit more about this one of your retirement reality doesn't meet your retirement expectations?
Sure, for some retirees, there is kind of a gap between what they expect and then what their retirement reality is like. And this can play out in two different ways. I mean, one is in lifestyle. You might expect to do certain activities every day, but then you find out that you're actually bored doing those things after, months or a year or so. Or you just realize that it's not as fulfilling as you thought it was going to be. And so you might think about, well, maybe I'm back to work, or it may be location based if you decided that you're going to retire in Florida. And then you realize, you know what, it kind of sucks to be here. It's hot all the time. And, you don't get to experience the seasons like you used to. So, there is that gap. You expect it to be great, and then the reality is much different. The biggest area is in finances. For example, you might expect to receive a certain amount of income from one particular asset, whether it's your portfolio. And you realize once you're actually in it, in retirement, you realize, okay, maybe this doesn't cover my expenses as much as I thought it would. I know Gallup does a great job putting out a survey every year that kind of compares the expectations of non-retirees and retirees. And it's interesting to see the disparity between the two. One particular area is that workers expect to be earning income in retirement from part-time work, whereas the majority of retirees say they don't get any income from work. So there's that gap between expectation and reality there, because you could
Sure.
potentially have a income shortfall if you're really anticipating on receiving that working income. And then once you get into retirement, you realize, wait a minute, I can't really find a job, or I really don't feel like working, or a disability now. So then what do you do?
Right. And I suppose it can be additionally challenging if you're married and, having your spouse on the same wavelength as you, finding activities that you enjoy doing together. or maybe you need some space apart too. So if all of a sudden you are away from your spouse during your working years and then you're together every waking minute, that could be a challenge in itself too.
Yeah, exactly. And gender kind of plays a role. I mean, I've read that women generally, when they reach retirement, they're very active and doing stuff and experiencing, trying new things, whereas men typically kind of stick to their routines and they're not going out to seeing friends or family as much as their spouses are. And so there is a little bit of a disconnect.
Right. And I get what you're saying about, your expectations not meeting reality. I'm a golfer myself, but I think some people think they're going to retire and be out at the golf course every day. And then after doing that for a couple of months, they realize that it gets a little frustrating or it gets a little old. And with golf, particularly, it's, when you're not playing well, you don't really want to be out there every day.
Right, exactly.
Maybe you already addressed this a little bit, but did you have any specific tips of how to prepare for this?
Well, I think primarily it underscores the need for ongoing planning and, I mean, working with financial advisors to kind of see how realistic, it would be for your assets to cover your expenses. And the thing too is that, for one example, if you own your own business and you're expecting to sell it, you might have a price in mind, but maybe you should start planning with the idea of like, well, what if I only get a price there? Not trying to plan far out ahead, expecting to get the price that you desire, really. So that's kind of the finances. In regards
Sure.
to lifestyle, if it's possible, I would recommend trying to take a little trial run with retirement. That could be just using vacation days where you just spend time at home experiencing it as if you're retired. And if you have dreams of retiring in a certain location, maybe you can work remotely there or vacation there for an extended period and trying to see what day to day life is there.
Sure. I think what I'm hearing you say too a little bit is just being intentional about it and, having a process versus just going from, 100 miles an hour of I'm working to a dead stop of, okay, now what do I do? Just thinking through it and trying to be intentional with it.
That's right. I think a lot of people, they're so motivated with the anticipation of retiring that they kind of overlook the fact of what it might actually be.
Well, we could probably talk a lot longer about just that one, but let's jump into the second reason, and that is you need a new identity. So what do you mean by this exactly?
Well, this pertains to the idea that the transition into retirement it's a major psychological shift. I mean, whether we love our jobs or not, they're a major part of our identity. All introduce ourselves as I'm a doctor, I'm a writer, I'm a financial advisor, etc. But what do you say when you're no longer working? You don't have that job identity anymore. There is some research that shows that workers that identify strongly with their jobs, and then if they don't have few social interactions along with that, then they really struggle.
I wonder, maybe you don't have this off the top of your head. I kind of wonder if you're a business owner, if you have a closer identity to that occupation, or maybe farmers come to mind too, that's just really who they are. Any thoughts on that of the type of occupation or your relationship to it, whether that makes it a tougher transition?
I can imagine it would. I don't have any particular research in mind for that, but
Sure,
I'd say you're pretty spot on that it probably would. I mean, that's
sure.
especially when it's a position in which you're involved from long hours and you get a lot of sense of purpose out of that job. It's not just a 9 to 5.
So same question, I guess, following up again. You had to have a couple of tips to prepare for, needing a new identity.
I think first and foremost is to kind of envision the idea of going through multiple stages in retirement, especially, I mean, if things are set up well enough where you can kind of generally like, hey, I could potentially be in retirement 20 years. I'm okay financially. What am I going to do during that time? You should start thinking of like, it'll be okay to kind of change identities during that time. And you don't have to wait till then, of course. I would recommend kind of test driving activities now, trying different things Could be new hobbies or just kind of taking note of some of the things you've always wanted to do. What are your big lifelong goals? I mean, maybe it is to start a business, or maybe you wanted to become a musician or something along those lines. And those identities can change abruptly as well. I mean, you might start off in retirement with everything being all about yourself, where I'm going to travel, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. But then over time, it might be about helping others. You might want to be the caregiver. You might try to help out your grandchildren and raise them, or you might start becoming a volunteer. I will say too, like it doesn't have to be a dramatic change. I wrote about another article of two gentlemen that actually, one was a retired optometrist and was a retired pilot. And they didn't want to really quit what they're doing, but there were no opportunities in their professions anymore because of age. And they just started volunteering for a nonprofit that fights avoidable blindness around the world. And so the pilot got to fly the plane, which kind of acted as a flying eye hospital, they called it. And then the optometrist got to be the optometrist for that, to still help people around the world.
Yeah, that was a really cool article. We did a podcast episode on that one, well, a handful of months back, but we had a lot of good feedback on that. That was really, I think, inspiring to people that are looking for that next step in retirement, kind of finding that purpose beyond their occupation. So, that was a really, really well done article. Let's jump into the third reason that you list is you experience a health problem. So on our end, helping retirees with their Medicare coverage, this is a big one that I'm privy to as I'm looking at a lot of retirees' medications and having a discussion about their health history, which maybe is likely a lot of financial advisors are maybe never getting into those types of conversations because they're only managing the assets and they're not really looking into, medications for one, or health history too. But why is this such a big issue?
Well, I would say, first of all, that I think you're ahead of the curve. I think that will be a bigger priority among financial advisors. I think, too, with just technology. I mean, we're tracking our health, and I think now we have more data to kind of see what, potentially what our life will be like later in age. And that's an important piece of our finances. I mean, there's a reason why healthcare costs are retirees' number one. I mean, that's across the board in so many different studies and surveys. There's a financial tag to that. There's various studies that show that a retired couple is probably going to spend upwards of $300 to more than $400,000 out of pocket in retirement on healthcare.
Wow.
So that's a big issue. And I think within healthcare, the biggest fear is long-term care. I mean, that's very expensive, and people don't want that extended time in a facility or stuck at home. So that drives a big fear of how people plan for retirement.
Right. And I think with my experience, at least with long-term care, is that sometimes you just mention those words, long-term care, and people's mind immediately goes to insurance because maybe they have maybe they have a bad experience. They've heard so many sales pitches or whatnot,
Right.
for insurance. But really long-term care is something to play. It's something to plan for, whether insurance is the answer or not. It's definitely something to prepare for because, if we just put our head in the sand, that doesn't make that possibility go away.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a variety of ways of covering that. I mean, there still a lot of individuals can just self-fund and pay for it that way. And still a lot of people won't ever really need it, or maybe at most they might be in the hospital a few days or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, just having the conversation, kind of circling back to the original point of being intentional about this stuff. I think sometimes the conversation is valuable too of, would you move closer to your kids? Would your spouse be able to care for you? I've been in meetings where, I'll ask, what do you guys plan for this sort of situation? And the husband will say, well, my wife will take care of me. And she kind of shoots him a look like, that's not my plan. Like, we haven't talked about this. So even a lot of it is just the family dynamics conversation there, I think. And maybe that leads right into the how to prepare, you did mention in your how to prepare section for this one, health is wealth. So I guess maybe that's self-explanatory, but what does that mean, and how can we make this a priority?
Sure. I think you're spot on. Having these conversations is key, and because that can help reduce the concern and the fear and the uncertainty of what would actually happen in these situations. And that's the biggest problem is families just trying to scramble to now figure out who's going to do what and how are things going to get covered. And that fear can prevent people from actually enjoying retirement. So they won't want to touch their savings to do certain things that they had anticipated on doing just because of that fear. But if you actually have the conversation and start planning for it, then you can comfortably start living retirement without that kind of cloud over your head.
Sure.
But in regards to the idea of health as well, there's two pieces to that. I mean, certainly that's a kind of a phrase that relates to the idea that when you're healthy, you're going to feel better about life. You're going to be able to experience things more. You're going to actually just feel richer, the fact that the healthier you are. And that can be today or in retirement, whenever. Just kind of doing things like not smoking, drinking moderately, exercising daily, all those things that are prescribed that we all know and not all of us do as well as we should, can just still make life a little bit better. If your health is better, by extension, you're going to need less care. That the health risks for things like cognitive impairment or heart disease or high blood pressure drop dramatically. And then by extension, you're going to need less care. And then you're going to have lower healthcare costs. I mean, it's not a guarantee, of course. The unexpected can always happen, but generally that's kind of how things would work.
Right. I've seen kind of both sides of that. I think, I retired. I haven't retired, but a guy that I used to work with retired, and it was sad to see because he had worked his whole life so hard, and he'd been relatively healthy, and then it seemed like as soon as he retired, his health just went downhill pretty quickly. And if you sometimes, I don't know how many of us take a step back and sometimes think about, what am I putting all these hours in for? You kind of just do it without thinking about it, I think sometimes. But if it is to enjoy that in retirement, enjoy those, the fruits of your labor, yeah, you nailed it. You want to have your health for that. And I've also seen the other side where you mentioned specifically the dollar figure aspect. When I run Medicare coverage for clients, and some can pay next to nothing for their healthcare on an annual basis, and then others, some of these medications, I've had people paying $5,000 worth of medications just for a year, and it doesn't take a genius to multiply that over 10 or 20 years and think about how much that's draining their financial resources too. But health is wealth is definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think that probably hits home for a lot of the people listening.
Yeah. And I think for just everybody, I mean, it's something you should have as a priority no matter your age or where you are in life, because your health compounds as well, just as much as your money can.
Right. We don't have to wait for retirement for that one, do we?
Right.
I think that's a great place to put a pin in it for now, and we will be back in just 2 more weeks to finish this conversation with Jacob. We've covered the first 3 reasons, and we will hit the last 2 of the 5 total reasons you'll blow up your retirement plan. And be sure to check out that article. We really don't need a cheat sheet for this one because Jacob did a great job. He summarized everything very nicely in his article. So if you want something a little bit shorter, be sure to check out 5 reasons you'll blow up your retirement plan, and I included that link in the show notes. God bless, and we will be back in just 2 weeks.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.